I am Jason Noland. I'm a professor at Fairmont State in the teacher preparation program. Primarily, I teach undergraduate instructional technology. I also do some arts integration courses, and I also teach a couple of classes in the Masters in Digital Media New Literacies and Learning program. Primarily, my session here today comes from, the topic especially came from my work as a National CAEP accrediting visitor. So I've done a CAEP site visits, Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation Program visits in 5 different states over the last 3 years. And the topic today came from a lot of the common themes that I hear from not only completers of educator preparation programs, but also host teachers and employers, and what we see as site visitors. Those themes are that the completers are often comfortable with the current technology, but they may not be comfortable with properly incorporating new technologies that come as they get more experience in the classroom and new technologies come out. And that the educator preparation programs of the schools don't know how to adequately track the teacher candidates' technology use and experiences throughout the programs. So those are the 3 main points that I'm going to focus on today. Let me share my screen if I can. I have not used this program in this way, so let's see how this works. All right, let's see. Do you see my my PowerPoint screen?
Yes, we can see your PowerPoint, and it's in presentation mode. Perfect.
Awesome, and I can't see anyone, so I'll see you, Suma. All right, so context is always important when we're talking about these types of topics for me. So our demographics at Fairmont State, we have 12 initial licensure programs with 3 add-on options for elementary candidates. So elementary candidates can do not only their K-6 multi-subjects, but they can also add some classes and get Math 5-9. They can add 3 classes and get special education, and they can add a lot of classes and also get Spanish. We have between 60 and 80 completers each year, generally. Currently, 10 faculty are housed in the College of Education. We just became a college as of this month, actually. We have 1 or 2 positions that need to be filled, but will not be filled for this coming year. And then we also work very tightly with additional faculty across colleges. You know, those in the sciences and the social studies and math are always very good about having conversations with us and helping us to make quality programs and put out quality candidates. So theory and practice, focusing on my class, which is Education 2201 Instructional Technology. It is a freshman level course, and it is a core curriculum for education majors. So all elementary and secondary majors have to take that class, but it's also a university general studies course. So that means anyone in the university can take this class, and it will count towards I forget which component, but it's basically the component of the general studies that focuses on technology. So I generally have 3 sections of this class every semester with around 25 to 30 students each. And each class is a mixture of education majors and non-education majors. I get a lot of exercise science majors. I usually get a couple of psychology majors, 1 or 2 nursing majors, couple business majors, but it's primarily education and exercise science with a couple more people sprinkled in, which makes it a little bit challenging, since I did try at one point in time to make dedicated sections for education majors and then dedicated sections for non-majors, but that didn't end up working out. So for that reason, I'm a little bit flexible in a lot of our assessments. You know, the education majors have to do all of the assessments the way I dictate them, to make sure they are prepared to enter the classroom and also to meet our licensing criteria. Then the non-education majors, I sometimes give them some leeway in how they complete their assignments. So particularly in research that we do, I allow them to focus their research on technologies that will be applicable to them in their future careers, whether it be being a physical trainer or you know, an occupational therapist, whatever it may be, so that it's not wasted time for them necessarily. It is a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class for 50 minutes. We do meet face-to-face. Of course, this year we did hybrid, where I split the class half and half, which was kind of fun. And it was certainly a learning experience for all of us, but it was also a positive experience for the education majors, getting that experience as a student in case, as we move forward, we may end up doing some more of that hybrid. I can think particularly for snow days, maybe that could be a good option for that. Many counties might take hold of. Available resources in our technology classroom are an Apple TV, an iPad cart, a laptop cart, TV projection. We use Dash and Dot robots and Google Cardboard. As we get a little further into the presentation, you might be thinking that's not very many technologies, but I've chosen those ones because there are other technologies that the students will be introduced to in other courses throughout the program. So I'm just giving them, the basics, theory, and practice, and then they can get more experience on some other hardware and software in other program level courses. I also have Google Cardboard. I forgot to write that down. So we do a little bit of VR as well. So my philosophy is I don't spend too much time making them memorize how to use a certain software or hardware, because we all know those change, and they usually change very quickly. This is a freshman level course, so it's going to be 3 years if they're on track until they get into their student teaching. So even in that 3 years, what I might make them become very proficient in their freshman year might not be really used in schools anymore in 3 years down the road. So I get their feet wet in multiple hardwares and softwares, but I really focus a lot on the theories behind, analyzing new technologies for their use and how to use them efficiently in a classroom. But for practice, I'm a big believer in project-based assessment and project-based learning. So most of what we do is projects that are centered around these technologies, and they're using the technologies for their assessments. So they get experience every day through activities and assessments, both small group, large group, and individually. Focusing again on theory, instructional models, and brainstorming techniques, because since they're freshmen, they haven't learned the ins and outs of lesson planning and unit planning and curriculum design. So we're doing very rudimentary lesson plans where they'll just brainstorm activities or brainstorm a unit without fleshing out the full lesson plans. All of our readings are taken from scholarly journals and other reputable online resources. So I think that's really important that students be able to identify those good sources as they become practitioners in the field, so they can keep up with what's happening. I also have 2 required textbooks, and students love this book more than I thought they would. It's called Classroom Management in the Digital Age. Really short book, but it really brings to light a lot of ideas that the students didn't really think about before. One of my favorite quotes from this book has to do with basically discipline, and to think about any discipline issues with students that are surrounded or centered on a device. So if it's texting in class, think about the non-digital relative of that. So texting in class would be like when I was in school passing a note in class, and not to over discipline based on what was happening. So when I was growing up, if someone was passing a note in class, the teacher wouldn't take away everyone's pencils and paper. They would do something else to curb that behavior. And oftentimes we know that poor behavior is based on bored students, So don't take away all the digital devices just because someone is not using it appropriately. Figure out how you can make that not happen without taking away the devices totally. The second book is Learning First, Technology Second by Liz Kolb. This gives a brief overview of all of the theories that I'll talk about in a minute, but it mostly focuses on the Triple E framework, and it is an amazing resource that really opens a lot of their eyes. In everything we do, I try to introduce them to some sort of a technology, hardware, software. So I often use discussion starters using Poll Everywhere, and I usually use the anonymous function. So I'll put out a question, or I'll put out a multiple choice thing, or I'll put out a series of questions at the beginning that have to do what we're talking about that day. And it's amazing a lot of times what you will see pop up in that Poll Everywhere when they know that it's not going to be tied to them specifically. And a lot of our great discussions comes from that. So it's kind of my modernized approach to a bell ringer to get their brains going and get them thinking about what we're talking about. I often use discussion groups, virtual and face-to-face. Think, pair, share. We're looking at a certain reading, and I want them to think about a certain idea. Take a minute for them to think about it by themselves, and then pair up and then share out. And I found in the virtual environment, it really helped me to force breakout groups. And we used Teams. I used Teams, I should say. We had multiple options at Fairmont State, but I found Teams really helpful in the breakout groups because I had all of the groups put into the chat what they were talking about at that point and like a summary of their discussion. So I knew where they are, and they could also send a question to me without me having to go into the each of the individual groups, and I could keep track of them real time. And it also allowed them to have kind of a draft of what they were going to say when they shared out with everyone. I do try to give them as much experience as possible with Microsoft 365 tools, since every K-12 student in West Virginia has a 365 account. So sometimes I'll have them do a project on Sway, so they have some experience with that. Certainly a little bit of Excel, because a lot of the students, most of the students, have no experience with Excel whatsoever when they get to my classes. And certainly Microsoft Forms and things like that. So they have that little bit of an understanding of what they're capable of as they move on through the program. I do have them create a classroom management plan with technology after we read the classroom management book. So often in our teacher preparation programs, their classroom management plan is really focused on, you know, their classroom environment. What are they going to do when they get into the room? What are they going to do with their papers? All that stuff. But it's also just as important for them to have a plan of how they're going to manage the technology. So I focus that a lot on how do they get their devices? Is it a one-to-one school that you're in? Is it a school that has a laptop cart and you have them get the laptop when they are coming in and put it away when they're going out? What is your plan for that? What is your plan to make sure students know what is expected of them? What is your plan when you have forgotten to say something, or there was a good question and you need everyone's attention? What's your plan? Are you going to have them turn their screen upside down? Are you going to have them, tilt their screen so they're not looking at it and put their eyes on you? And we also talk a lot about ways to make sure students are still working while they're waiting for some help. So we talk about using either different colors of index cards, where a green means I'm good to go, I don't need help. A yellow means I have a question, but I can keep going before I have my question answered. But red means I'm at a total stop until I get help. Where they're brainstorming all that stuff, so they're ready to implement those when they get into their clinical experiences. I do have them do lesson and unit brainstorms surrounding virtual field trips, particularly leaning on student-led learning and research-based projects, digital storytelling, all that kind of thing. And then we also get introduced to Dash and Dot robots. I do know that later in the program, the elementary majors and the science majors get introduced to Lego We-Dos, and other courses have them use Flipgrid and a lot of different other programs. So I try to keep up with what the other professors are doing, so I'm not doubling up what they're already being exposed to. And then I do also I'll have them do a lot of personal research. I get them a lot of resources that are education generic, and sometimes I'll pull up something for each individual discipline. But I think it's important to have them do personal research using technologies in their specific context and disciplines as well. So the theories that I focus on are the Samura model, the substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition, the 3 tiers of technology integration, the SWAT model, which was actually created for business, but I think it's really important to use here, and the EEE framework. The reason I focus on these is, again, what I said earlier, where the technologies that come out change, and what's current and relevant now might be different in 5 years. So having these models to be able to brainstorm how and when to use technologies are important. And I also really focus the students on being able to create plans and create, when you're writing a grant, for instance, if you're writing a grant to get a technology, how you're going to sell the people that are going to fund your project, that it's an important thing and it'll be useful for your classroom. And I also remember when I was in K-12, it was so common for schools or counties to buy a certain software or hardware for all of the schools. And I remember there was like when clickers came out, we had to, in various schools that I was in, we had to log using that at least twice in the year to justify the county's cost on buying those. And that happened with a lot of different technologies. So I stress that when we're going over these, that Oftentimes, when you're forced to use a technology to justify the cost, it's not necessarily using it in the best meaningful use of your time and the student's time. So particularly, I was a music teacher. Using a clicker wasn't the best use of my time necessarily, especially for a lot of things that we do. I could think the same thing probably for PE teachers. Yeah, you could have a multiple choice quiz on the proper form for playing baseball, but having them actually physically doing baseball is probably a better use of your time and your students' time. So I tell my students, when a county or a school comes to you and says you have to use this because we bought it, use these models and come back saying, okay, this is not the best use of my time and my students' time, but if you would buy me this technology, this is why this is a better technology for me to use. So having these things in their toolbox are helpful for them to write those and justifications and rationales. So let's go into each of these a little bit in case some of you are not familiar with all of them. So the first one that I do is the Samura Model. And I love this image. This is one of the hardest things for my students in my classes to comprehend is the Samura Model. So I found this image a couple years ago. I keep on using it. It really helps the students to visualize what's happening. So the Samura Model is basically brainstorming assessments using technology that are much more student-led, student-centered, and go deeper into understanding. So thinking about Bloom's, higher order thinking skills types of things. So when I'm looking at this graphic, I tell them, this guy on the beach, he's using no technology. And I say no technology is also like paper and pencil, which are in some ways, sure, a type of technology, but it's not a modern technology that we would think of. So this guy is studying the ocean and he's on the side of the beach and all he can do is look out into the ocean. He might be able to take a couple of steps into the ocean, but he really doesn't have a great understanding of what is underneath the water's surface. He has very surface level knowledge based on what he can see at the top. Then if you look at your canoe, canoe is a little bit more modern of a technology. So here is substitution level where your technology acts as a direct tool substitute with no functional change. You're still just seeing the surface of the water. You can go a little further out, but you still can't see any further down. Then next we go to our snorkeler. So we have our goggles, we have our flippers, we have our little air tube. So we can put our face in the water now, and we might be able to go a half a foot, maybe a foot, depending on how long your air tube is. But the technology here is directing it as acting as a direct tool substitute with no function, or with some functional improvement rather. So at substitution and augmentation, we're enhancing what we were doing with no technology. So for a substitution, you might, instead of writing out a paper, you might type it out using like a word processor. At augmentation, I kind of think of augmentation as the encyclopedia on the disc that I remember when I was at elementary school coming out, where you have some images, you have some very basic couple second videos, but it's still basically giving you the same information. Where modification and redefinition, that's where you transform the learning. It's much more student-directed learning. It's much more collaborative learning. It's much more research-based, and the students are the drivers of the knowledge instead of being a regurgitator. So at modification, we have our scuba diver. So you have your air tank, you have your whole suit, you have your flippers, and the technology is allowing you for significant task redesign. So here, you're able to go a lot farther in the ocean and spend a lot more time under the ocean, seeing what's further below. So this might be you're creating a blog and you're sharing it with people, or you're having real conversations via Skype or via whatever with people in certain fields. Maybe you're talking to the President of the United States, or maybe you're talking to an astronaut, that type of a thing. And you're using all of that to do your assessments. And then at redefinition, the technology allows for the creation of new tasks previously inconceivable. So you have your submarine. In a submarine, you can go all the way down to the bottom of the ocean floor. You have a full view of what's happening in the ocean because you have your cameras, your lights, you have food, you have a place to sleep. So you can see everything at the bottom of the ocean as long as your supplies last. So if you're back here looking at your guy with no technology back in the 1800s, what you're doing at redefinition is unimaginable. So at redefinition, you might think of 3D, like doing an invention in 3D printing. You might think of using some graphing software and creating 3D models of a house if you're doing shapes or measurement or what have you. So this image really helps my students to understand. I also have 2 really good YouTube videos that I pull up every semester. One of them is the Samura Model explained by students, and the other one is using Starbucks to explain the Samura Model. So they go from no technology, where it's just a plain black coffee you can get at home, to redefinition, where you have your pumpkin spice latte or your caramel macchiato type thing, where you have to have the specialty machine and the specialty brews to get that type of coffee. We also look at the 3 tiers of technology integration. So the 3 tiers are: tier 1 is teacher focus on productivity. So I have students brainstorm what technology, hardware, and software makes a teacher's job easier. So this is often like live grades, because you can put your grades in and you can also talk to parents. This can also be things like Teachers Pay Teachers, where you can go and find pre-made lesson plans, anything like that. Tier 2 is instructional presentation and student productivity. So here is more large group. I have them think of what in a whole group classroom, what technology, hardware, and softwares make that easier. So certainly we have a lot of times smart boards, or touchscreen TVs, the projectors certainly. Sometimes we can even talk about things like classroom management systems, your Google Classroom, or your what have you, where you can put documents up that you need everyone to have, and it makes it a lot easier for everyone to get it. Or you could even potentially do it with the name is leaving me right now, but where you can airdrop things into everyone's iPad, so everyone has the exact same thing to work with and look at. And then tier 3 is student-centered 21st century learning. So this is more individualized instruction, where you have your Khan Academy type things, your I'm trying to think of what that iReady type of things, where students at different levels can have different activities centered around the same topic, but in an easier to manage way than you just spending individual time with each student. So I have them brainstorm each of those. And you might also have technologies that cut across. So tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, you might have Google Classroom, but the different functions of Google Classroom. And tier 1, 2, and 3 might also have the projectors, because certainly the teacher can put up the outline of what you need to do in the order you need to do it. You can also use it for whole group instruction, so everyone sees the same thing. But you can also use it for tier 3, where students are directed on where to go and what to do in their different groups based on their developmental levels. Then after we do that, we do SWOT diagrams, where you look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of each of those different hardwares and softwares. So strengths of the hardware and software, we focus on things that are good about it. PowerPoint, for example. Strengths are, it's pretty universal these days. Almost everyone has access to it. A strength might also be you have the online platform available, so you don't have to take a thumb drive like we used to have to do when I was in school. Weaknesses are things about the hardware or software that are issues, but and you can't change anything about it. It's just the way it is, unless the developer would change it. So weaknesses, if we think of old school PowerPoint, a weakness of that would be, if you're creating a presentation, you're saving it, you have to make sure the presentation and any, especially audio or video files, are packaged correctly on your thumb drive when you're checking it from place to place. So weaknesses are things you can't change about it. It's just the way it is, unless the developer or the maker changes it. Opportunities are ways you could use it in the classroom. So PowerPoint can certainly be a basis for student presentations, their outline, so that they have a visual of what they need to talk about, and they have a visual for the people they're talking to also to follow along with. And then threats are things about the program that could be problematic, but with proper planning and implementation, you could avoid. So that could go back to the way you package PowerPoint things. A threat could also be you have to make sure you have internet access if you're using the online version. So the main reason I do SWOT diagrams are for the strengths, the opportunities, and the threats, particular opportunities and threats, where the opportunities are having them start to brainstorm some ways to use it, and the threats are things they need to keep in mind as they're lesson planning. make sure I have internet access, make sure I have a backup plan if the internet's not working, make sure I have all the accessories that I need, that type of a thing, as they start to get into lesson planning. Then we have the Triple E framework, where the Triple E framework focuses on making sure that technology is being used in a meaningful way, where it's engaging the students, enhancing the learning, and extending the learning. I'm gonna wait a second. Sorry. We also live right by an airport, which I often forget about. So sometimes we have airplanes flying above. And so the Triple E framework is the focus of the Learning First, Technology Second book. And there's also a really great website, tripleeframework.com. This was created by Liz Kolb in 2017. And the website has some really great resources that I have my students pull out and use, like a worksheet where it has each of these questions in the different topics: engage, enhance, and extend, and you can give it a score. And the score will tell you if the technology is a good fit for what you're trying to do. So at Engage, the 3 questions you want to ask yourself is, does the technology allow students to focus on the task of the assignment or activity with less distraction? Does it increase time on task for what you're doing more so than is possible without that technology? The second question is, does the technology motivate students to start the learning process more so than without the technology? And then the third question is, does the technology cause a shift in behavior of the students where they move from passive to active learners, and they might increase co-use and co-engagement? So going from passive to active, so with active learning, they're engaged in the learning. They're driving the learning a lot of times. And this one also wants you to talk about co-use. And co-use can be peer-to-peer. It can be peer to teacher, and it can be peer to parent as well. So does it increase those things? At Enhance, the 3 questions you ask are, does the technology tool aid students in developing or demonstrating a more sophisticated understanding of the content more so than without the technology? Second question, does the technology create scaffolds to make it easier to understand concepts or ideas? So think of things like Khan Academy, where they go through a series of questions, but based on your responses or the students' responses, they can go in different directions if they need more practice on something, or if they are ready to move forward with harder concepts. And third, does the technology create paths for students to demonstrate their understanding of the learning goals in a way they could not do with traditional tools? And then extending the learning. First question is, does the technology create opportunities for students to learn outside of their typical school day? So can they take what they're doing and do it at home, or do it in the community in some way? Second, does the technology create a bridge between school learning and everyday life experiences? So if you're studying math, particularly, are they doing something in a way that it bridges to the home environment or to the playground or what have you? And third question, does the technology allow students to build skills that they can use in their everyday lives? Particularly here, students really need skills in word processing, and Excel is always helpful. Certainly research is important. How to use iPads and the internet in an effective and meaningful way that you would use in your life beyond the classroom. That's the main premise of the Triple E framework. Any questions about those things so far before we move into how we track technology use through the program?
I don't see any questions in the chat at this point, Jim.
Okay, cool. All right, so our model at Fairmont State is what we used for our accreditation visit in 2018, and it worked really well for us. We are going through a transition in our programs, since all educator preparation programs are required to go to the year-long residency model. So we're shifting some things around, but I think for the most part, this will remain in place. And you can take bits and pieces as they're relevant to you. So to make sure our students are using technology and learning about relevant technology throughout the program, each of our education core courses must contain at least one technology-focused assessment that is tied to the SD standards. those activities are progressive. So my course is a freshman level course. So we're getting the nuts and bolts and we're getting the theories and we're being introduced to different things. As they progress through the program, they're going to start doing more with, learning to use technology for student assessment of their own students, using technology in a meaningful way for the students, the K-12 students, to be using it on their own, and also for them to be using in whole group instruction. So as they progress through the program, they're going to get more and more in depth with how that works. Certainly appropriate for the course level. So in Instructional Design 1, I go back in. Instructional Design 1 is usually in junior year for our students. And I go back into that class at the beginning and I take a worksheet from a handout, basically, that I put together. And I say, okay, remember back to freshman year. We talked about the Samura Model. We talked about the EEE framework. We talked about all these things. We were introduced to these technology, hardware, and softwares, and you were also introduced to these technology and hardwares and softwares in the other courses you've taken. Now, think back to these, and how are we going to put these into our lesson plans as they start looking at lesson plans? And each of those education core assessments are archived each semester in TaskStream, along with the description, instructions, and rubrics. And I'm going to go to a different screen and show you what that looks like for us. So can you all see my Excel sheet right here?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so we use TaskStream right now. And so each of our core courses has to map basically everything in TaskStream. And I pulled out the ISTE mapping for us. And it's a little clunky to look at on my small screen, but you can see up here, all of the ISTE standards are tagged and described. And you can see here our list of education courses. So Intro to Education, they have various of the ISTE standards that are mapped in a measure added. If we would go back into TaskStream, there's hyperlinks here that take them to each of those individual assessments as well. And you can also see my Instructional Technology, Human Development, High Incidence Disabilities, Instructional Design 1, and then your field experiences, and action research and portfolio. So each of the core courses, which are the courses that every education major has to take, no matter if you're elementary or secondary, each of them has that requirement and are mapped in this. So when CAEP or AQUIP comes, you can pull out this Excel sheet and say, hey, here's our mapping. And so you can see that all of the ISTE standards are mapped and measure added at various points in the program. And if they wanted more information about that, then you could click on the hyperlinks and pull up the individual assessments as well. Okay. So I did mention earlier that Lego WeDo is also introduced to students in their science courses. Flipgrid, especially in the disabilities courses or the special education courses. Digital storytelling, not only in my class, but also in some of the other like social studies methods classes, things like that. And then other electronic resources where, the social studies, the math, the phys ed, those instructors point them toward electronic resources specific for those disciplines. And we also collect additional data with student teaching assessments and clinical assessments related to technology as well. So that, in a nutshell, is our process and what we have framed everything around. Any questions at this point? Yes, Hillary, technology for technology's sake. Yes, that's the phrase I use. Don't use technology for technology's sake. And yes, Starbucks, Crystal, it's amazing. That one does seem to help a lot. I don't do Starbucks personally. We do have a Starbucks on campus, but most of the students understand it. Any other questions or comments? Hopefully you have something that you can take out from today. I really found that the EEE framework especially has started to resonate. That one's a fairly new one for me. I think I started it last year. And it really has helped the students to be able to reframe their mind, especially when they get to instructional design. Thank you, Chris. I should say, if you have any questions or you want any of my information, my email address I'll actually put in the chat is jnoland@fairmontstate.edu. And feel free to email me, ask questions, and if you want some of my resources, I'm happy to email things to you. or if you have things that you think I should do, I'm also open to suggestions. Book. Okay, Stephanie, that book is called Learning First, Technology Second by Liz Kolb. And I got this off of Amazon. I think it's like $35. There's a second version of this. I forget what it's called. I haven't bought it yet. But you might also look at that one. This one is this the second edition? Maybe it's not a second edition. So you're welcome. And then the other book that I mentioned was Classroom Management in the Digital Age. This one's like $15 on the Amazon. And Stephanie, a lot of the resources that are in the Learning First book are also available on the EEE Framework website. One thing that I love about this book is there's a lot of scenarios that I have my students go through, and it describes what a teacher is doing, and it gives you the educational focus, and then it walks you through each of those questions and why they're yeses or nos or maybes or sometimes. So that's really helpful to the students. And it saves time for you saves you from having to make them up on your own. Why reinvent the wheel when it's already created? Thank you, Alex. I've heard of that. I haven't really, I haven't dove into that model, so I wrote that down. I'll have to look at that, Alex. Thank you. All right, if there's nothing else, that's all I had for today. I'll give you about 13 minutes of your day. Go stretch your legs, get a coffee, take a break.
Thank you, everyone, for attending our session today. And a very special thanks to our presenter, Jason Noland. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. I would appreciate if you did that. Have a great day and a great conference, everyone.